Pearl Jam bridged the gap between commercial rock on one side and underground music on the other.
They made grunge a kind of much bigger thing, and they showed a different side of grunge. They're really forefathers of that movement.
They're uncompromising, and they can be frustrating. You can't help but admire Pearl Jam.
They were definitely always about longevity rather than burning out and fading away.
Pearl Jam were born out of the early 90s Seattle grunge scene.
The origins of Pearl Jam go back to a band called Green River, a really good band. They were very much into the classic rock tradition, as the name suggests. They were into Creedence Clearwater, Neil Young, all that kind of stuff. But being in late 80s, early 90s Seattle, they were actually the forerunners of the whole grunge movement. Two of them went off to form a band called Mudhoney, who are a superb grunge band, still going. The other two went off to form a band called Mother Love Bone.
Mother Love Bone are the great lost band of Seattle grunge. They were fronted by the extremely charismatic Andrew Wood, and they seemed set to be the first Seattle band to break through. However, just before their debut album was about to be released, Andrew Wood died of a heroin overdose.
And I think it had a big effect on them as songwriters. It was quite a devastating loss for them. It sent ripples through the community they were in as musicians. And I think made them kind of see the darker side from a young age, really.
So Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament went on to form Temple of the Dog, who were effectively an Andrew Wood tribute band, who included Chris Cornell for a while, who would later find fame in Soundgarden. And they also received a demo tape from a young man called Eddie Vedder, and he ended up duetting with Chris Cornell on one of the Temple of the Dog's songs. There was the beginnings of Pearl Jam.
After briefly naming themselves Mookie Blaylock, they eventually settled on Pearl Jam. Due to the growing interest in the Seattle grunge scene, the band were quickly signed to Epic Records. One of the songs from their demo had impressed the label.
Have I got a little story for you? What you thought was your daddy was nothing but a wow, you were sitting home alone at age 13. Your real daddy was dying.
Alive was partially, not completely, the story of his life, where he didn't realise that the person whom he thought was his father was in fact his stepfather, and that his biological father had died of multiple sclerosis some years ago after his parents had divorced.
So Alive is a really kind of seminal Pearl Jam song, I think. It's kind of seen as quite a positive song. When I hear it, I feel like it is, but I think at the time he was actually saying, I don't kind of want to be alive. I think it was actually quite negative and quite hard for him. So it comes from a place of its own personal story and also kind of fictional element to it as well.
Anything to this very day, except the love, the love. Oh, you know it. Now I can see, I just stay, I'm still alive.
Alive was the lead single off their debut album, 10. Released in 1991, it stood out from the emerging grunge crowd due to its socially aware lyrics and Vedder's unusual deep voice. But as the band rose to prominence, they faced criticism from within the scene.
The Seattle grunge scene at the time, particularly in its early days, it was incredibly incestuous and it was incredibly elitist too. And of course, it would transpire that everyone from Kurt Cobain to Mudhoney to the Melvins all ended up with major deals. But Pearl Jam were really the first Seattle act to get a proper major deal and to start selling records. Because Kurt Cobain was such a purist, he very much confused selling records with selling out. And that was basically his accusation.
I don't think it's fair to say Pearl Jam, were not pioneering in their own way. I absolutely think they were, and I think 10 was a great debut album. It was really marked them out as kind of ability to write rock songs with a real kind of earnest, emotional quality to them.
I think they were pretty unashamed about the fact that their influences were a bit more classic rock rather than the kind of hardcore punk place that Nirvana were coming from and they'd come up through.
They weren't really a grunge band ever. They're actually a rock band who were into, Neil Young and Creedence Clearwater and all that lot.
To Kurt Cobain's credit, he realised that he'd been a little bit silly and he recanted from some of those views. And before he died, he and Vedder and the other members of Pearl Jam were friendly once again.
The third cut from the debut was Jeremy. With the lyrics being based on a tragic true story, the song and its video proved controversial.
Jeremy was this song about a boy who killed himself, and based on a true story of a kid who shot himself in front of his classmates, and it was a bullied child. It was that thing of reaching out to the bullied kids, probably, who are the kind of kids who probably would have listened to a lot of what was then called grunge.
I think it's a really strong, kind of bold, statement of a record. I think it taps into that kind of adolescent angst that so many people feel, and probably connected with that song at the time. It did become a prophetic kind of song. It's about, high school suicide. So it's obviously difficult subject matter. It was quite controversial, I think, as well, especially with the video.
They had these grinding, quite exhilarating hard rock riffs, but on top of this they had Eddie Vedder. And Eddie Vedder is a soul singer, a man who croons over these riffs, and that's what made Pearl Jam different.
I think their big heroes were probably The Who. I think what they would have really liked to do is achieve the kind of thing that Pete Townsend did with Tommy and Quadrophenia, where there are these very complex and sort of quite obtuse psychological ideas which were filtered through a storyline and then it combined with, sort of very visceral rock music. And I think that was Pearl Jam's goal.
After extensive touring and topping the Billboard charts with 10, Pearl Jam were one of the world's biggest bands. They entered the studio with producer Brendan O'Brien, who had become a long-time collaborator with the band.
10 was a great album in terms of songwriting, but was pretty murkily produced. Brendan just pushed them to kind of get that raw, kind of aggressive rock sound, I guess, that they were always kind of aiming for. I think as well he made them kind of record it in a live setup. It was kind of how they would perform live, and that made the record sound much rawer and kind of more exciting.
They didn't like being this big, horrible, what they saw as corporate rock band, so they were looking for someone to kind of refine the sound a bit and make them a bit more of a traditional rock band sound, and Brendan O'Brien was a good ally in doing that because he came from a similar sort of place.
And he was such a muso that he'd actually go on tour with them and play as part of their band. And that's what fueled their relationship. He was also into recording as live as possible, and that's something else that appealed to Pearl Jam. So essentially, they were all singing from the same hymn sheet.
The resulting album, Verses, broke records upon its release, selling 960,000 copies in its first week. But the band, and in particular Vedder, struggled with the fame that came with being a global group.
The band just had a bit of a kind of epiphany at this point. They basically decided they didn't want to have anything more to do with the media. They'd been branded sellouts as well, and kind of were seen as, they were everywhere in the press. I think they just had enough.
They came from a generation, along with Nirvana, of kind of retreating from that and being more introverted. Eddie Vedder started showing up to interviews wearing masks, and they refused to make videos.
The reason that they could do this was because they had commercial clout. No record company is going to stand up to an artist who's doing that, particularly when that sense of purity, whether it's real or otherwise, appeals to their fan base too.
Despite the fact that they chose not to play along with the music industry, they continued to be a commercial force. Whilst promoting their third album, Vitalogy, they took a stand against Ticketmaster, who distributed most of the American ticket market.
I thought it was really brave, because Ticketmaster essentially controls all the big stadiums and all the big concert halls in America, or at least they did then. And so let's say a band charges $30 for a ticket, then it instantly goes up to 40, and there's nothing you can do about it. And they were trying to fight against this, and it was really a one-band battle, because they tried to organise a boycott against Ticketmaster, and hardly anyone would go with it, because they wanted to keep on working.
It meant for years they couldn't tour America properly because they played venues that weren't beholden to Ticketmaster.
The band took another risk with the album No Code. It was a more diverse release which experimented with psychedelia.
No Code did not go down well. No, it really didn't. It was too experimental. It's not what people want from Pearl Jam. They want those earnest, emotional rock anthems.
This is the time when they were absolutely stymied by the whole Ticketmaster thing. And they were just they were kind of abandoned limbo. You know, they'd set out all these goals, and then the goals were preventing them from doing what they did in the first place.
So Pearl Jam didn't really have a standoff with their fans, but they backed down, and they recorded the incredibly tellingly titled Yield. Yield's a good album. It plays to their strengths.
Yield saw the band return to their hard rock sound, and with it came their first promotional video since Jeremy for the song Do the Evolution.
Do the Evolution it's a kind of fairly primitive garage rock song. Really good, actually. I think it's one of the best songs they've done.
Do the Evolution was very much based on a book by Daniel Quinn called Ishmael, which is about a gorilla. And you wouldn't get that completely from the video.
The video was a cartoon of basically taking a very dim view of evolution. It sort of suggests we only evolve into horrible situations, and so there's films of sort of concentration camps and Nazis and all this kind of stuff. It was all very, very brutal.
Pearl Jam can do emotion, but they also do issues. That is their thing. It just has been something that kind of goes with them throughout their career. They're anti-injustice. They've got a thing about it. So yeah, environmental issues, social issues, depression, you name them. You know, Eddie Vedder is going to write songs about them.
In 2000, the band played the Roskilde Festival in Denmark. Tragically, 9 fans were crushed to death during the show. The band was initially held by the Danish police as morally responsible for the accident, although this charge was later dropped. But it cast a shadow over their album, Riot Act.
Thought, well, what we do, what's the point in that? What did we create that? Could it have been avoided in any way? And I think it was so profound and so disturbing and damaging that there's a real reassessment of what they could do And I think also it's a much more acoustic album.
They were also kind of reflecting what's going on with the Bush administration at that time. I think it's more layered and kind of more textured. It's a beautiful record, but it is very dark.
You had a song such as Bush Leaguer, which was clearly very, very political, and you had Saved, which is about the death of a friend. And I think it was Pearl Jam just coming to terms with things that had happened around them. If you play a concert, people aren't meant to die. If people do die, clearly it would be inhuman for you not to be affected by that, and for that not to inform your work in some way. And I think they handled the response in as dignified way as they possibly could.
I get the impression with Pearl Jam is that, you know, on one level they've always got a lot of stick for being this kind of, you know, commercial side of grunge or whatever. But I think there's real integrity at the heart of it. And I think you could see that at each level, and I think this is an example of that.
The band parted ways with Epic, and after the release of the self-titled Pearl Jam, they set up their own label, Monkey Wrench, for the release of their 9th studio album, Backspacer.
By the time Pearl Jam formed their own label, I think they were looking increasingly of ways to continue to be a big band and to have a state of independence. You know, it's a continuation with the battle with Ticketmaster in many ways. You know, they're trying to get to a place where they could do what they wanted, but without being too involved in the murkier side of the music industry.
I guess it's kind of them getting away from that whole sellout tag. They were always kind of regarded as sellouts and mainstream kind of darlings. And I guess at this point they're just kind of sick of being called it, and they're trying to do something different.
They had a new spring in their step, and I think partially this is because they realised finally, after all the years of soul searching, who they were. And this, in a sense, Backspacer is your ultimate Pearl Jam album, or the most ultimate Pearl Jam album since 10.
Backspacer was definitely a refreshing of the sound for them. I mean, certainly it was the first Pearl Jam record in a long time that a non-Pearl Jam diehard fan could actually listen to and get something out of. Just a bit more upbeat, just a bit more of a pop sensibility, just breezy and a bit, it sounded like they were having a lot of fun for the first time in a long while.
Backspacer topped the charts worldwide. After the successful PJ20 tour that followed, the band swiftly recorded their next album, Lightning Bolt.
There's been a light and I can see clear. Have to take your hand and feel your breath, for the early Sunday will be over. I pull you close, so much to lose, knowing that nothing lasts forever.
I really like Lightning Bolt. Yeah, it's great. I love this song, Mind Your Manners. What a great kind of return. I think it's great to have them back. And yeah, you could hear the Pink Floyd references. I think the guitarist Mike had been to see Roger Waters in concert and was really kind of influenced by it and inspired by The Wall and just wanted to do something similar. I think it's kind of classic sounding Pearl Jam, and I think they still sound like they've got their mojo.
What I do hear is the best individual song in years. It's got Vedder, who's now kind of looking a little bit old, a little bit grey, but he still sings almost better than he always has. And it's got melody, it's got texture as well. It's certainly the best song of the late period. And it's also something for them to build on, because Pearl Jam aren't going to give up easily. They're relentless.
Oh, every choice, mistake I made is not my plan. Or to send you in the arms of another man.
I don't think it's unfair to call them careerists, but not in a nasty way. I think that, you know, they saw themselves in the lineage of bands who had longevity. Bands like R.E.M. and Neil Young, Crazy Horse, and all these bands that they were into. So they were definitely always about longevity.
The band worked very, very hard. They try not to rip their fans off. They try and deliver good material. You know, if you like them or not, I think a lot of Pearl Jam's longevity has come down to the fact that people really do respect them and feel that they're on their side.
They show that you can carry on. You don't have to be faddish to succeed, and they're part of an old tradition. And if you can keep the old traditions going, that keeps those traditions alive and it makes them contemporary. And Pearl Jam don't sound dated just because they've got a career path that bands before them have had. And here's Pearl Jam doing it the old ways and selling millions of records and millions of concert tickets every time they step outside their front door.